This is the story of Daniel Hartwell and his wife Emily Hartwell. They had been married for 9 years, long enough that their silences had acquired texture, some comfortable, some hollow. Daniel was a quiet man who expressed love through consistency. The coffee made before she woke, the car filled with gas before a long drive. Emily was charming, socially fluent, the kind of woman who made every room feel warmer. For years, the marriage functioned like a well-maintained house, presentable from the outside, the interior slowly collecting dust in corners neither of them thought to check. What erodes a marriage is rarely a single catastrophe. It is the accumulation of small choices. An eye held a second too long somewhere else, a laugh saved for someone outside the home, desire quietly redirected until the original recipient no longer notices they've stopped receiving it. The Tuesday evening Daniel came home to find Emily already on the phone, laughing, was not unusual. She laughed easily. It was one of the things he had loved first about her, but there was something different about this laugh. It was lower, meant for fewer ears. She heard the door and turned, and for a fraction of a second, less than a second, barely a tremor, her expression changed. Then it returned to normal so quickly he wondered if he had imagined it. "Hey," she said, covering the phone against her chest. "I'll be off in a minute." He nodded and went to the kitchen. She was off in 4 minutes. He heard the call end while he was washing his hands, and when she appeared in the doorway she was already talking about something else entirely. A colleague who had said something irritating. A dry cleaner who had lost a blouse. Daniel listened. He made the appropriate sounds. He opened the refrigerator and began moving things without purpose, just to do something with his hands. They had dinner. She asked about his day. He asked about hers. The conversation was not cold. It was warm in the way that a familiar sweater is warm, simply because it has been worn so many times. After dinner she curled on the couch with a book, and he sat at the table with his laptop, and the house breathed quietly around them. Later he would think, this is what contentment looked like from the inside. And also, this is what I missed. He had first noticed the shift 4 months earlier. Not anything dramatic. Emily had not become distant or cold. If anything, she had become more attentive in certain ways, as though compensating for something only she knew about. She brought him coffee more often. She remembered small things. But there was a quality of performance to it, a deliberateness that had not been there before. When you know someone's natural rhythms, you notice when they begin to act their way through scenes instead of living them. He had not said anything. He was not a man who spoke before he understood. He filed things quietly, the way an accountant does, noting discrepancies without confronting them until the columns made sense. The other person he had noticed was Ryan Caldwell. Ryan was the husband of Natalie Caldwell, the couple they sometimes had dinner with on holidays. Ryan was extroverted, athletic, the kind of man who tells stories with his whole body. Daniel had never disliked him exactly. He simply had the faint, unremarkable sense that Ryan found most men slightly beneath his notice, unless they proved otherwise. He had seen the way Ryan looked at Emily once, at a dinner in October. Not predatory, something more confident than that, something that assumed permission, and Emily had held that look for a moment before turning away. Daniel had poured more wine and changed the subject. Weeks passed, months, and then one evening in February, Emily left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered, and a message lit the screen. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. The name was enough, and the way the message began, I keep thinking about. Before the screen went dark. He stood in the kitchen for a very long time. Then he refilled his water glass, went back to the table, and opened his laptop. He did not change his behavior. This was a deliberate decision. A man who suddenly becomes cold tips his hand. A man who becomes unusually warm does the same. Daniel had always been steady, and so he remained steady. And in that steadiness he began to learn things. He hired the investigator 6 weeks after February, not out of a need for confirmation. He no longer required confirmation, but because he knew that emotion, unmoored from documentation, accomplishes very little in legal proceedings. The investigator's name was Gerald Foss, a compact man in his late 50s who wore reading glasses and spoke with the quiet economy of someone who had seen every version of this particular story. "You want the full picture," Gerald said on their first meeting. "I want the picture that holds up," Daniel said. Gerald nodded once. They understood each other. During those weeks, Daniel continued to live beside Emily with a patience that surprised even himself. They still talked over dinner. They still watched films on Friday nights. She still reached for his hand sometimes when they walked. Each time she did, he held it, not coldly, but carefully, the way you hold something you are still examining, still trying to understand the weight of. He thought often about the difference between what he had believed the marriage to be and what it apparently was, not with bitterness exactly, but with the particular disorientation of a man who has been reading a map confidently and then realizes in small stages that he has been oriented in the wrong direction. Emily, for her part, was carrying herself with an energy he recognized as guilt-turned performance. She booked a weekend in March, just the two of us, I miss us, and he went, because refusing would have broken the surface in a way that served neither his plans nor his own need to simply know, for a while longer, what this had been. The weekend was genuinely pleasant. They ate well. They walked along a harbor. She laughed at his jokes. They slept in the same bed, and she rested her head against his shoulder, and he lay awake listening to her breathe, thinking, she is capable of this, and also capable of that, and both are true. That was the part he could not reconcile. Not the betrayal. He had accepted the betrayal on the night in February when the screen went dark. What he could not quite fold into a manageable shape was that she loved him in some version of the word. He believed this. It did not make things better. In some ways, it made things more complicated. Gerald delivered his report in early April. Photographs. Dates. A hotel whose name Daniel noted with a flat, dry recognition. It was a hotel Emily had once suggested for their anniversary. They had not ended up going. He looked at the report for a long time. Then he called a lawyer. Around this time he thought to look into Ryan Caldwell's wife, Natalie. He had always liked her. Quiet, precise, possessed of a dry humor she deployed sparingly. He recalled she worked in architecture. He recalled that she watched Ryan with an expression he had always interpreted as pride, and now reinterpreted as something more vigilant. He found her email through a mutual acquaintance, framed as a professional enquiry about a renovation project. She responded within an hour, professional and exact. He wrote back. They scheduled a call. She knew. He understood this within the first 2 minutes of the call, not because she said so, but because of the careful way she didn't. They spoke in a kind of formal code for several minutes, two people standing at the edge of the same cliff, not yet certain whether to acknowledge the drop. Then she said, "I've had some concerns about certain patterns. For a few months." "Sane," Daniel said. A silence. "I have documentation," Natalie said. "So do I," he said. They agreed to meet. They chose a restaurant called Orwell's, a quiet Italian place in a neighborhood neither of them frequented. Daniel arrived first. He chose a corner table and ordered water. He had told Emily he had a client dinner. Emily had said, "Have fun," and kissed him on the cheek, and he had driven to the restaurant thinking about how smoothly she moved through the double life, and whether she had always been this way, or whether this was learned. Natalie arrived 7 minutes late. She was taller than he remembered, dressed without ceremony. A dark blazer, hair pulled back. She scanned the room when she entered with a precise, evaluative gaze of someone accustomed to assessing space. They ordered wine. They laid out what they had. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and thorough and somewhat awful, the way most real things are. Natalie showed him dates, texts she had photographed, a credit card statement with the hotel. Her voice did not shake. Her hands were completely still. "How long have you known?" Daniel asked. "Certain. 3 months. Suspected before that." He nodded. "And have you decided what you want?" "I've started the process," she said. My lawyer has what she needs." He told her his lawyer had what he needed as well. They sat quietly for a moment, two people who had not chosen this evening and were managing it with what dignity was available. "I had a thought," Daniel said, "about how this ends." Natalie looked at him. He explained the idea. She was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her wine glass and considered it. "That's not revenge," she said finally. "No, it's just clarity." "Yes." She set down the glass. "All right." They agreed on the place. The same restaurant, a Saturday evening, a table he would reserve under his name. He would tell Emily he had dinner plans with a colleague. He knew with the specific certainty of a man who has paid close attention for 9 years that Emily would check his location eventually, and when she did, and recognized the restaurant, her reaction would not be proportionate. It never was when she felt she was losing something. He did not plan what would happen after. He was finished planning around Emily's emotional weather. He filed in the second week of April. The papers were served on a Wednesday morning while Emily was home. He was not there. He had arranged it that way, because he did not want the conversation that would follow to happen at a moment she controlled. She called him 6 times before noon. He did not answer. He texted once. "My lawyer will be in touch. I need space right now." She appeared at his office in the afternoon. His assistant told them. He asked her to say he was in a meeting. Emily did not take this quietly. Over the following 2 weeks, she deployed every instrument available to her. Apology, rage, revisionism, tenderness, then rage again. She left long voicemails in which her voice moved through 5 registers in 3 minutes. She texted his sister. She appeared twice more at locations he frequented, each time framing it as coincidence. Through all of this, Daniel maintained a consistent temperature, polite, brief, routed through lawyers. He was not cold. Coldness would have been a form of engagement. He was simply somewhere she was not. The dinner at Orwell's was set for a Saturday 3 weeks after the filing. He had known Emily would check his location. He had known she would recognize the restaurant. They had been once for her birthday years ago. He had known that whatever story she told herself about what was happening, it would involve him doing to her what she had done to him. People often attribute to others the behavior they themselves are capable of. What he had not known, not entirely, was how she would look when she came through the door. She wore the gray dress, the one she wore when she intended to be taken seriously. Her face was composed in a way that cost her, he could see that, the particular stillness of someone who has cried already, recently, and repaired the evidence. She saw him immediately. She crossed the restaurant with the directness of someone who has rehearsed this. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was low, controlled. "I think you should explain what this is." He looked at her quietly. And then Natalie Caldwell rose from her seat across the table. She did not say it dramatically. She said it the way you give someone your name at a professional introduction. Clear and unhurried. "Emily. I'm Natalie Caldwell, Ryan's wife." A pause. "I think we should all sit down." Emily's face did something complicated and private. The composure she had worn into the room, the armor of the gray dress and the repaired eyes, shifted in a way that was deeply human and not at all flattering. The color left her face. She looked at Daniel. He met her eyes without expression. She did not sit down. She stood for a moment that seemed to cost her something structural, some internal arrangement she had been relying on. Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant. Daniel and Natalie sat back down. The waiter appeared. They ordered dinner. It was, in the end, a quiet evening. 6 months later, Daniel was living in a rented apartment on the west side of the city, a place with high ceilings and not enough furniture. He had bought a good coffee maker and a wooden bookshelf and left the walls bare for longer than was practical. Not because he was sad, but because he was, for the first time in a long time, uncertain what he wanted to look at every morning. He and Natalie spoke occasionally. Not romantically, that was not what either of them was. Not yet, perhaps, not ever. They had coffee twice. They texted in the way people do when they have shared an unusual experience and found, on the other side of it, that they respected each other. There was something between them that was not friendship and not courtship, but something quieter, the specific comfort of being understood by someone who has no reason to perform for you. Ryan and Emily had tried, apparently. This information came to Daniel sideways, through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it in passing. He received it the way he received most news now: noted, filed, moved through without residence. He thought about Emily less than he expected to, and more than he would have chosen, not with bitterness, which would have been too energetic, with a kind of careful sadness, the kind you carry in the background, that doesn't interrupt the day, but reminds you of itself at odd moments, on Tuesday evenings sometimes. Or when he passed a restaurant they had liked. He had loved her. He was reasonably certain she had loved him, in the way that people love the things they stop tending to, still real, but neglected into dysfunction. He did not think of her as a villain. This surprised some people who heard pieces of the story, but he had been married to her for 9 years, and he was a man who paid attention, and what he understood now was that Emily had drifted not because she was cruel, but because she had a need she couldn't name and couldn't ask for, and rather than bring it to him, she had found another door. He thought about this a great deal, about how the distance between two people does not announce itself. It accumulates silently, in the fraction of a second before an expression resets, in the laugh that is lower and meant for fewer ears, in the message that begins, "I keep thinking about," and goes dark before the sentence ends. He had made his own errors. He knew this. The consistency he prided himself on had perhaps become a kind of wall, reliable, dependable, impossible to reach through. He had loved her in the language of maintenance, and she had needed something less stable and more present, something that asked and trembled and wanted to be wanted back. He understood this without excusing it. Both things were possible. The apartment's windows faced east, and in the mornings the light came in sideways, long and honest, the kind of light that shows the dust in the air. He had begun to notice things like that, the quality of morning light, the weight of a silence that was his own and no one else's. He was not happy exactly, not yet, but he was, in some way he was still learning to map, awake in a way he had not been for a very long time. He did not know what came next. He had spent 9 years building around a certainty, and the certainty had turned out to be a shared story they had both agreed, quietly, and without discussing it, to stop revising. Now he was at the beginning of something he had not chosen and could not yet name. This did not frighten him as much as it once would have. Some mornings he made coffee and stood at the window and watched the city begin its day, and the thought that came to him, not dramatically, not like a revelation, just a quiet arrival, was that he was, for the first time in a long time, no one's idea of himself but his own. It was a thin and tender thing, that feeling. He held it carefully. Outside, the light kept moving, as it does, indifferent and constant, across everything that remains.